the best in the NFL this year. Big time.
Turn up!
But based on watching them compared to what they used to be and what they became, I believe that they lost their mystique because they lost the confidence that they once had in their coaches from that point forward.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game. When you try me with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, that's the result you're going to get.
Wilds, you are correct that Malcolm Butler play, I believe now that we have the perspective of nearly a decade of history, has an argument to be the single most important play in NFL history. If Malcolm Butler doesn't make that play,
one of the NFL's formerly most controversial debates belongs to a team with the heaviest rainfall in the country and the 12th man in the Northwest. That is, until the catastrophic implications of last season happened. And the year before that. A once fiery and passionate argument has become fruitless in the eyes of the majority of NFL fans. However, I still think there's more to be said about this discussion and this 5-year torrential reign, or dare I say dynasty, of the Seattle Seahawks. Today, we're going to be dissecting a dynasty, Russell Wilson versus the Legion of Boom. As we wrap on the 2023-24 season, I definitely want to return from my hiatus with something I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. With the news last offseason of Sean Payton taking on the Broncos' head coaching responsibilities, and former Legion of Boom staple Richard Sherman donning the desk with new co-host Skip Bayless on The New Look Undisputed. This conversation has become less of a discussion and more of a foregone conclusion in most eyes. I mean, you let the people tell it, and the conversation is pretty seemingly going to be one-sided. Wilson, a near surefire Hall of Famer just prior to his departure in Seattle, has faced unprecedented criticism for his poor performance last season, leading his Broncos to an abysmal 5-12 finish. And on his second chance per se, or in reality his third, he didn't fare that much better. Sure, 7-8 as a starter beats 5-12, but by how much? At least not enough to convince Peyton and the Broncos brass that he was worth that guaranteed money. Now, before I spoil the movie, let's reel ourselves back a bit. We are talking about one of the most electric performers of the last decade with Russell Wilson. King of the moonball, Drew Brees framed with the athleticism of an aged Randall Cunningham, or even like a Donovan McNabb. And this guy's a Super Bowl champion. Not only that, but he's the franchise record holder for passing yards, passing touchdowns, highest passer rating in team history, game-winning drives, fourth quarter comebacks. I mean, the list goes on and on. Instead of opting to sing the praises of the incredible performers on that ferocious Legion of Boom defense before their individual departures. Beginning with a slew of injuries to Cam Chancellor, Earl Thomas III, and Richard Sherman in the years 2017 and 2018. Today, we aim to uncover the truth behind this debate, and hopefully, come from a well-researched and hopefully entertaining perspective. So what do you think? Was it more Russ, or did the Legion of Boom play a bigger factor into their, mini dynasty, or whatever you want to call it? Just go ahead and put your answer in your head now, because who knows, at the end of this video, it could be changed. So let's get into it. Alright, so, we're going to start really with the defensive side of the ball, and by proxy, Coach Pete Carroll fits into this argument as well. Before we can get into details, we'll have to properly introduce these guys as they fit into the bigger picture. Boom, 2010 hits, and the Seattle's opt to pick dynamic free safety Earl Thomas III out of his alma mater, Texas, after they just lost in the BCS national champion. I mean, this dude was decorated. You got 4 rounds later, that same draft, and the Seahawks were able to grab 225-pound, 6'3", hard-hitting wham, bam, Cam Chancellor. And, he's coming from Virginia Tech. Just a year later, Seattle grabbed KJ Wright and Richard Sherman in the 4th and 5th rounds respectively, and followed that up with the pickups of Byron Maxwell and Malcolm Smith in the 6th and 7th rounds of that same draft. And, when you're talking about the Seahawks, this type of hit rate in the draft can kind of become commonplace or be expected, but there's no way to really overstate how incredible this, war room was to make those picks and get those players. And when the first couple months of the 2011 season rolled around, the early version Legion of Boom made their first start together. Most notable from that game versus the Bengals was trash talk extraordinaire Richard Sherman, getting started early in his antics with, focusing on AJ Green this game. Just to put things in perspective, AJ Green has 63 yards, a tub, and Bengals win 35-12. And yet, Sherman's first career pick in the game fueled him to go to that post-game presser and say, hold up, let me get this because I don't want to get this wrong. I don't want to misquote him. So he says, Green is probably one of the most overrated receivers out there. He wasn't anything special. Andy Dalton is a good quarterback. He makes good decisions. But AJ Green is just a lot of noise talking and bad routes. That's pretty on par for Sherman now, what we come to expect from, the multiple-time All-Pro, surefire Hall of Famer. But doing that as a rookie after your first game, that takes guts, to say the least. So the following year saw Bruce Irvin selected in 15th round to come off that edge for them. You got B-Wags, who would become another Hall of Famer for that defense. He was picked in the second round at number 47 overall. And you probably guessed it, Russell Wilson enters the picture this draft, selected 75th overall in the third round, and we'll get into that a bit more later. But we're heading into the 2012 season, and we're seeing the defensive guys improve and improve and improve. These guys are getting stronger, they're getting faster, and so forth. Ready to flex their muscles and skill sets for all to see. Maybe more importantly, for the grand scheme of things, the moniker, Legion of Boom, was born in part thanks to a random Seahawks fan recommending the Legion of Boom nickname to the Ferocious Squadron. Since Seattle was starting to have some impressive talent on both sides of the ball, they really began to believe, okay, it's our time now. First victim, none other than my underprepared, unsuspecting Packers, as they went down by the famed or maybe infamous Hail Mary game. And, going off script a bit, this is a very much a sore spot for me. I was watching this game. Nonetheless, this was the first feather in the cap for the increasingly impressive and electric Seahawks defense, winning 14-12 in the disastrous ending. For me anyways. Some weeks after, week 6 specifically, Sherm continued his controversial ways when he iced their 24-23 defeat of the Titanic New England Patriots by way of a third quarter interception. Of course, the controversy didn't refer to that. Instead, Sherm took to Twitter post-game to address the game's outcome in a series of 3 tweets. And then, let me go ahead and read these quotes too. Don't, Sherm's my guy. I don't want to misquote him. So, from Twitter, he says, Brady sure looks like a man who turned the 12th man against us. Obviously being sarcastic. Oh, hey, that's my cat. What's up? Okay, so, next tweet. He told me and Earl to see him after the game when they win. I found him after. And then, of course, to finish it off, cap it off with a third tweet. These type of things always come in threes. He just says simply, "You mad, bro? You mad, bro?" Y'all remember that? I think this was 2012 or whatever. That was super popular then. You mad, bro? You mad, bro? Anyways, so. Of course, never changed Sherm, and he never has. A couple weeks after that, Sherm was making headlines for his self-given nickname of Optimus Prime when he was going up against, of course, Detroit Lions Hall of Famer Megatron, or, of course, if you don't know him by that nickname, Calvin Johnson. And Sherm may have got the best of Megatron on the gridiron, holding the Hall of Famer to 3 catches and 46 yards, but Detroit still snuck out with the 28-24 dub. The up and down season gave the Seahawks their first playoff berth in years, much thanks to their number 1 ranked defense, which allowed the least amount of points in the league. The rolling Seattle team got the win versus Washington in the 24-14 finish behind the defense that provided 7 sacks, 1 Earl Thomas interception, and 8 pass deflections. RG3, before his injury, finished with an abysmal 84 yards passing, and after his injury, Kirk Cousins was only able to put up 31 yards himself. That being said, they faced a more experienced, capable offense with the Atlanta Falcons in their divisional matchup, and even with the 2 interceptions, 12 pass deflections, and 5 quarterback hits, the Falcons had just enough to squeeze by the rolling Seahawks behind strong performances from Matt Ryan, Roddy White, and Tony Gonzalez. That puts a bow in the 2012-13 season, but the Seahawks, and more importantly the Legion of Boom, they were only getting started. Now, you may be pumped for how the Legion of Boom is forming within the Seattle defense. However, the more remarkable story was how drafting Russell Wilson in the 3rd round took their squad from a 7-9 team from, the previous year to winning a playoff game after finishing the regular season 11-5. Now, before you get on my head, yes, I know the defense plays a huge part of that. However, we all know the pivotal role quarterbacks play on their respective teams. There's no other position like it. Touches the ball every play, the most expectations, the most to lose, and as a rookie, Russ willed his team throwing for a rookie record 3,118 yards on a 26-10 TD to interception ratio. Now, of course, that's a franchise record. That's not the rookie record. And he's no Justin Herbert. But those rookie stats are never going to jump off the screen at you. Even for 2012. Even so, and I feel terrible for doing this because I love Herbert. But Russell Wilson had more playoff victories than Herbert did after year 1. Sure. Tell me about the defense. I get it. It's a low blow. But let's not pretend, even though he threw for 187 yards, 1 TD, 0 interceptions, but he also ran the rock 8 times for 67 yards in that playoff win. And yeah, that's not nothing to sneeze at. Yeah, sure, having beast mode Marshawn Lynch, their running back during this dynastic run, and in this game he's running for 132 yards on a beastly 20 carries. Yeah, that helps. Don't get me wrong, that helps a lot. But without, competent quarterback play that's not turning the ball over, call it Brock Purdy-ish, call it whatever you want. It's, it's not going to happen. That win, you don't get that win. Shoot, even in their loss against the Falcons, Russ had 385 yards, 2 touchdowns, and just 1 interception. That type of split doesn't grow on trees, and that's on top of 60 yards, running the rock as well. And that game, Lynch only went for 46. Now, okay, it was 20-0 at one point in this game, and those stats, you could call them garbage time stats. Twitter wasn't really popping like that back in the day, but I'm sure that's what they would have called it. But, Matty Ice, Matt freaking Ryan, I don't even know if I can cuss on here. Matt Ryan was that guy, especially, I think this is 2012 or whatever it is. This is prime Matt Ryan, so he was lighting those boys up. But even so, I feel like a lot can be said about a quarterback and a team that will put themselves in a position to win a game when they're down, 0-20. And that's the exact opportunity that they had up 28-27 with 31 seconds left. But Matty Ice had the ball. Maybe if they would have kept them out of field goal range, but, what do I know? I'll give them credit for getting 2 picks, but how you get 2 turnovers and let them drop that much? That's just crazy to me. They was running up and down the field. I need to turn the tape back on this one because I'm still confused. If we think about this like a round-based boxing match, got Russ on one corner, Legion of Boom on the other, I'd say it's still anybody's game at this point, but, let's get into the rest. Longtime NFL fans know how important the 2013-14 season is for the Seahawks when they crescendoed into their most dynastic season in Seattle's storied history, franchise history. Entering the season with 17-2 odds, Seattle's rise to the top came in part out of nowhere, unless you were paying attention, of course. And for those people paying attention to the, at least the defensive side of the ball, this was a long time coming for the blue and green. The high-flying, hard-hitting defense was firing on all cylinders, from this point onward. A lethal pass rush mixed with the suffocating pass defense spelled trouble for most offenses in the league. They could blitz on any down and smother some poor team, but could rush for and easily get home with the likes of Cliff Averill, Michael Bennett, Frank Clark, and company. They were disciplined against the run as well, hugely in part to the next level IQ and offensive reading skills of their on-the-field leader, Bobby Wagner. And, not to gloss past this, but they finished 13-3 with the number 1 seed in the season. Hugely impressive. But their first playoff game, it's anybody's game. They're going against the New Orleans Saints with prime Drew Brees. And they were quickly dispatched too. prime Drew Brees with a great Saints squad, 23-15. Next up, the division rival San Francisco 49ers. Now, a lot of people probably remember this game. This is one of the most controversial and polarizing moments for this Legion of Boom defense thus far, and probably, ever, especially for Richard Sherman. Late in the matchup, Sherman would make an inhuman acrobatic play to swat the ball away from staunch competitor and rival Michael Crabtree for what was potentially a game-clinching touchdown. And now, a pass deflection turned interception to teammate Malcolm Smith. And for most, the play ends there, but not for Sherm or this abrasive and suffocating DB room. After being refused for a handshake from Crabtree, which was undoubtedly a gesture born out of disdain and not respect, Sherman continued his antics in the post-game presser, saying,
"The final play, take me through it."
Well, I'm the best corner in the game. When you try me with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, that's the result you're going to get. Don't you ever talk about me.
Who was talking about you?
Crabtree, don't you open your mouth about the best. Or I'm going to shut it for you real quick. LOB.
At that point in time, there was really no corner that was as boisterous and prolific as Sherman was. He was great on the field, and off the field, he was just as superstar-like, for lack of a better term. What's lost in the shuffle of this momentous matchup with division rival 49ers is that the once lowly Seahawks had just booked their first Super Bowl appearance since 2006, and only other Super Bowl appearance. This was a huge feat for a team composed over the course of the last half decade, at that time. Before the city of Seattle knew it, this team had been completely turned around from that 7-9 season just a couple years back. This team was not only contending, but now only stood one game away from the ultimate goal. I hate to be a broken clock about this, but unless your name is Kyle Shanahan and you have Brock Purdy, a team led by an average or worse quarterback just isn't leading their squad to a division best 13-3 record. They just aren't, and especially then it was unheard of. And to continue the broken clock trends, I'll say again, the numbers will never stop you in your tracks, but I'm taking this type of efficient, not flashy, mistakeless quarterbacking all day, every day when it comes to playoff intensity football. With that preface, I was even shocked to see them summoning the Breeze-led Saints team in that first, round, while Russ threw for a measly 103 yards on 18 total attempts. And Breeze himself went for 309 yards and a touchdown, Part of me wants to say you can thank, the run game for that, but I can't deny the fact that the defense plays a huge role in that. Even allowing Breeze to go for 309 yards, they obviously play a role in holding a dynamic offense like that to 15 points. But, my heart says they were still in fear of what Lynch did to them in that fateful 2010 game. Got the moniker Beastquake for how crazy of a run that was. And if you thought Russ's numbers were weak then, he threw 215 yards for a touchdown and no interceptions against the Niners too, but doesn't exactly, like I said, jump out of the screen at you. But it really paints the next game, the Broncos and Seahawks Super Bowl, in a very, very interesting light, because it's just as contentious, just as half and half, and just as hard to decide who really gets the credit talking about the Super Bowl, especially those guys on defense. Not only did the Legion of Boom prove their worth throughout the course of the season, but now the dynamic defense could display their prowess on the biggest stage of them all. Against a Peyton Manning-led Broncos squad where the Sheriff had just thrown for record-setting numbers, and this is league records, 5,477 yards and 55 touchdowns. Now that jumps out at you, even now, even today. Then the Legion of Boom would crescendo to new heights, holding this historically great NFL offense to just 8 points in their 43-8 routing of the once great Broncos, but now lowly. The Seahawks were up 36-0 before the Broncos even put 1 point on the board. Sure, all facets of the Seahawks squad were firing on all cylinders. That's what makes it so hard to really decide, okay, who gets the credit for this, because it's more of a orchestra type deal. But no one gets more credit than the Legion of Boom. It has to be at least equal, because these guys played out of their minds. One of the best Super Bowl performances on any side of the ball ever. And while I can't admit that, dropping 43 on the Super Bowl opponent's head isn't easy either. And throwing for 206 yards and 2 touchdowns is exactly what the doctor ordered for Seattle in that moment. And Russ delivered. But no, I won't be mentioning the 3 touchdowns scored on defense and special teams in that game, because that would muddy the argument, and we want to keep it more contentious. Or wait. This single moment acts as the pinnacle of the Seahawks' dynastic run and even the highest point of the franchise in its history. It really paints the conversation in a funny way as well, because like I was saying, looking at this single peak of the team, their greatest moment, each side of the argument could make their case as to why they played a bigger role in the team's success. Even to dial things back further than that, it's a crazy comparison to say, hey, Russell Wilson, this one guy, is more valuable than a whole defense, and that's not even speaking to how accomplished they were. And it would probably be a fairer or better comparison to compare, the offense to the defense. That's why you count in guys like Beast Mode and DK, Lockett, Doug Baldwin, Curse, guys like that. But for one, the argument has been squarely placed on Russell Wilson versus the defense. So that's one part of it, but I'm not going to lie to you guys. Like, it's just more flashy to talk about these big names. And if you make it offense versus defense, it kind of loses the luster a little bit. I'll let you peek behind the curtain. But before we spend too much time on arguing semantics and soaking in this metaphorical and literal high, let's move on and see one of the low points in the entire Seahawks franchise, but not in the way you quite would expect. Now, rolling into the 2014 and 2015 season, there was, as Dan Campbell would say, no one else to hide from as the Seahawks looked to repeat on last year's success and make it to the Super Bowl and hopefully to win the big game again. And thankfully, the bad news doesn't come till later, because they would prove to be just as apt thanks to re-signing some key pieces on that defense like Earl Thomas III, Cam Chancellor. They signed them to long-term deals. They finished this season just one game worse as a division winner, yet again, but with a 12-4 record this time, matching up with the Carolina Panthers as Cam Newton was just entering his prime and would be in the Super Bowl soon. After holding off a hungry Carolina team 31-17, they were primed to fight for their football life against, yet again, my Packers and Aaron Rodgers led Green Bay Packers. It was good memories, until this moment. This was one of the craziest games I've ever watched. And again, I feel like I can go off script because I was there, I lived in the moment. And what stands out the most to me from this game, no question, is that freaking 2-point conversion. I mean, Russell Wilson, known for the moon ball. I mean, it's basically in his blood at this point. But how the hell do you throw a moon ball on a 2-point conversion? I remember Clinton Dix being right there. He was right there. And they catch that. They go on to receive their own onside kick. Before you know it, they're in overtime, and boom, throws it to Curse. It was inevitable at that point. Packers lose, and the Seahawks are going to the Super Bowl yet again. Good for them, but stings for me the same. But, thankfully for me, I got to see some swift revenge from the NFL gods. The up-and-coming Seahawks, who, had just proved their might last year, they have to go against the real big guy on the block, the New England Patriots, led by the GOAT. The GOAT, still the GOAT, even after this year, Tom Brady. And just like as a side note, thinking back on it, going through Cam Newton, prime Aaron Rodgers, and then having to face Tom Brady, that's not an easy feat for anybody. So I'm impressed with the Seahawks, both sides of the ball, just yet again. And, let's skip to the bad part, because it was a good game. It was a great game, well contested. And especially the defense was playing very well up to that point where the final drive, where it became very contentious, very polarizing yet again for these Seahawks. The moment was huge. They're on the 1-yard line. You can hear everyone's breathing. The stadium's completely freaking silent. If the Seahawks score right here, the game's over. The game's over. They're going to go up. There's like barely any time left, maybe less than a minute, I think. And boom, Malcolm Butler picks the ball off, jumps in front of that, slant. I'm pretty sure it was Curse, a slant to Curse. And they're on the 1-yard line, of course, what everyone ends up saying. But before we get to the outcry, the outpour after the game, Let's talk about just the moment for a second. Not only was this a gut punch to the Seahawks as a franchise, but even more so to the Legion of Boom, who had intercepted the GOAT twice and forced 4 separate punts in the bout. But we all remember Richard Sherman's face after that famed play, or should I say infamous play. It was the guy's memeable as anybody. The Seahawks would go punts, 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 and then interception their last 4 drives. Oof. This is obviously a horrible look for Russell Wilson and something that stayed with him and impacted his legacy for years to come. Now, just as certain as it seemed the Seahawks were climbing the totem pole of NFL franchises, the wind had been taken out of the sails for this promising young team. Not even a result of roster changes, coaching hires, or drafting miscues. Instead, the franchise foundation broke off the back of one decision. One that includes a player again excluded from the context of this video, just as he was ignored 1 yard from the goal line. Marshawn Beast Mode Lynch. It is crazy to hypothesize where the Seahawks would be right now if they just made that one different decision, but as they say, these decisions occur in the most pressing time of them all in sports. Just like that, the team that was once looking to appear in a number of more championship bouts would never see the Super Bowl again, at least not with the Legion of Boom or Russell Wilson. And when I say just like that, I mean just like that. In the 2015-16 season, the Seahawks would manage to finish with a 10-6 record. A semi-impressive, albeit, disappointing finish considering their dominance over the past couple seasons. To make matters worse, in the last quarter of the season, Earl Thomas III would end up breaking his tibia, sidelining an all-pro and a pivotal piece to the Legion of Boom's back line. Even so, the Seahawks dispatched the Vikings thanks to an abysmal, I still remember this kick from Blair Walsh that just was like 26 yards away. He just sailed it left. It was freaking crazy. But thanks to that, they were going back to Carolina. That success wouldn't last for long, though, because Cam Newton was back and Cam Newton wanted revenge for losing to these guys last year, of course. And they defeated their often-seen foe 31-24 in that divisional round. Then doubt begins to creep, of course, because it's the NFL. Questions begun to be asked even more so of coaching decisions. Sherman's speed in the deep field after his injuries. He was becoming a guy that you could almost never put in man. Cam Chancellor's prowess in zone coverage, and Earl Thomas's coachability. The pass rush was beginning to wane as well. Bobby Wagner was carrying the linebacking core by himself. And of course, Russ was in the hottest water of them all, skating by behind his moondrop balls and Pete Carroll's commitment to running the rock, which convoluted the infamous decision just a year ago even more. Even then, the Seahawks saw reasonable success from their mini dynastic run, bouncing back from their disappointing finish the year before against Carolina. Seattle would surge back in 16-17 to win the division once again, behind a now even lower 10-5-1 record. These guys were set to face a Stafford-led Detroit team in their wildcard matchup. So the biggest plot twist of the season was, of course, running back Marshawn Lynch retiring before the season started. And even though he would end up coming back a short time after, he was often the most undersung portion of the short run at the top for the Seahawks. And now, for the first time since they traded for him in 2010, he wouldn't be on the field. And that led to, of course, changes on their offense. Nevertheless, most NFL fans just believe this would prime the offensive reins to be taken firmly for once and for all, by Russell Wilson. However, as a Packers fan, this year is also remembered to me as one of the more underwhelming Seahawks years in recent memory. And that's due in part to when we went against them in Week 14, Russ put up 1 touchdown and five interceptions. And he couldn't have really played worse against us. I only wish he played like that in the, NFC Championship game, but oh well. Was dispatching the Lions in the 26-6 outing in the wild card round. Bad news? They faced Matty Ice and the red-hot Atlanta Falcons again right after. Kyle Shanahan and Dan Quinn had these guys humming on both sides of the ball. 27-3 be damned. I don't want to hear it. Anyways, the Seahawks found themselves getting the playoff boot early yet again behind this, 36-20 finish. A game so demoralizing, fan favorite wide receiver Jermaine Kearse would decide to hang him up for good after this game. And this is just one season after Beast Mode's surprising exit. So you can kind of see it in the distance now. I mean, these guys are starting to fall apart. People are leaving, and once it starts to unravel like that, there's not much you can do. And this would be the last season of that fateful Seahawks roster that seems so poised to take the NFC and run for it like for a decade. And what do they have to show for it? Well, more than most, but somehow still has a bitter aftertaste. With 1 Super Bowl ring, 2 appearances, 3 NFC Championship games, and arguably the best defensive force during that 5-year span, that's not that bad. There was never a standout on either side of the ball for these guys, and there was always an intricate symphony of talent and coaching, throughout the franchise. But heading into the 2017 NFL season, there was rumors and murmurs that if the Seahawks wanted to hold on to their success of the past, it would have to be this year. This was their make or break year before they would have to restructure in some type of way, because obviously what they have going on right now is just simply not working. Knowing this, the Seahawks avoided another lengthy buyout process in the offseason with strong safety wham bam Cam Chancellor. They agreed to a 3-year, $36 million deal. And even though the Seahawks found themselves in firm control of their season and future 9 weeks into their season with a 6-3 record, things would come cascading down after Sherman would rupture his Achilles versus division rival Arizona Cardinals. Shortly after, Cam Chancellor was placed on IR, the following week for a lingering neck injury. And this would ultimately be the final nail in the coffin for what was once the best defense in all of the land. They would go on to lose 4 of their last 7 and miss the playoffs entirely. And just the next year, these guys would squeak into the wild card round, but the roster was a far cry from what it once was. This formerly defensive-led, hard-hitting smash-mouth football team was now shifting to an increasingly offensive league. And they were trying to do that through their, what was thought to be, superstar quarterback Russell Wilson. Thus was born Let Russ Cook. And of course, it's kind of weird because that was always said because they weren't letting Russ cook enough, but it was also said only when Russ was actually cooking. But if you know Pete Carroll, he wasn't letting a go of that run game for anybody. Although, at the same time, the front office was busy releasing their superstar corner, Richard Sherman, after the two couldn't come to an agreement on compensation, and 100% his ruptured Achilles the season before played a huge factor into this. Months later, Cam Chancellor would retire via notes app to Twitter, citing his lengthy history with brutal injuries as his reason to step away from the game at this point in time. And if that wasn't enough for you, Earl Thomas III goes on to start his holdout and trade demands just days after Cam's announcement. In retrospect, Earl Thomas's saga with the coaching staff and front office went on to maybe even be more polarizing than their breakup they had later on with Russell Wilson. Firstly, Earl Thomas was quoted as saying, "If you don't want me, let's make a trade happen." He would subsequently end his hold September 5th with a lengthy, heartfelt post on Instagram. Then, only a few weeks into the 2018 NFL season, ET3 is seen flipping off Seattle's sideline while being carted off with what would later be diagnosed as a broken leg. Thankfully, Earl Thomas III went on to heal and get a desired deal from Baltimore, making him the last piece of that Legion of Boom DB room to depart the roster. Well, guys were still there like B-Wags, Bruce Irvin, and KJ Wright. They were still on the roster, of course. The Legion of Boom was no more. And this was a sad ending for what was one of the most dominant defenses in the league's history. And these guys, could stand toe-to-toe with any great defense of the past. The Purple People Eaters, the Steel Curtain, those Lawrence Taylor-led giant defenses, and so forth. But their team accomplishments will always hold them back in some of those conversations. Although, having 6 consecutive winning seasons, leading the league in scoring defense from 2012 to 2015, while simultaneously holding teams to the lowest points per game during that span. And of course, their 2013 unit being the first defense since the 1985 Bears to lead the league in points allowed, yards allowed, and the most takeaways. Let's just say I'm sure Seattle's faithful sleeps fine at night, having accomplished all that. And as you could probably guess, this is when the conversation swings more in Russ's direction, as his biggest case for value and worth to that Seattle mini dynasty was made staunchly by their offensive forward approach from the years 2019 to 2021. After losing to the Cowboys in the wildcard round in 2018, 19 was paramount for Carroll and Co. to prove that they were still to be feared and revered in the NFC. Russ would go on to have his best statistical season in his career thus far, a great sign for Seattle, throughout the team's 11-5 regular season campaign. With everything to prove, Russ would go on to have his best statistical season in his career thus far, a good sign for Seattle throughout the team's 11-5 regular season campaign. With everything to prove, Russell threw for 4,110 yards and a 31-5 touchdown to interception split, and of course an average QB rating of 106.3, which was a career best. Throwing to a now established dynamic duo of Lockett and DK Metcalf, Russ flexes moonball capability for any and all to see. And this would be en route to clinching the division for the first time since 2016. And of course, with that comes a playoff berth. Russ would put his team on his back in the matchup, throwing for 325 yards and a touchdown, while leading the squad in rushing, running for 45 yards on 9 attempts, in the 17-9 finish against, wait for it, it was a Josh McCown-led Eagles team. So we'll take winning a playoff game. It's never easy to throw for 325 yards, but not the craziest opponent ever. However, just after that matchup, the opposite of the 2017 NFC Conference Championship game, the Packers would get their revenge on Seattle. And, this still kind of sits sour with me because just a game later, we would lose to the 49ers. So kind of a bittersweet aftertaste for me. But getting revenge was great. We beat them, 28-23. No onside kick to save these guys this time, but they did try. However, even with that, the loss doesn't fall squarely on Russ's shoulders. The veteran quarterback threw for 277 yards, going 21 for 31 in his attempts, for 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions, and a 106.5 passer rating. And again, he led his team in rushing with 7 attempts and 64 yards. Now, some could argue that the defense can't be blamed thanks to Seattle's, offensive forward approach and clear realignment with those, values and ideals. Thus, Seattle would likely have to outscore all of their opponents just to beat them, which in retrospect sounds very obvious, but you know what I mean. Now, saying that, it could still be true that Russ played very well in the matchup. However, did he do enough? Well, the history books would tell you no. And regardless, another year, another failure to re-summit the peaks once seen by the Seahawks of old, which felt more and more disconnected to this Seahawks squad with every postseason disappointment. Committed to improving upon his craft and play, Russell and Co. walked into the 2020 NFL season ready to compete and proved that he could in fact lead a roster to a championship, dynastic defense or not. In almost every category, Russ's numbers increased in this 12-win season, throwing for 40 touchdowns and 13 interceptions, 4,212 yards, and also for a 105.1 rating over the course of the year. This was the peak of Lit Russ Cook, which would introduce his admittedly super corny alter ego, Mr. Unlimited. Or, should I say, Mr. Unlimited. Yeah. I hate myself for doing that, but let's put this in perspective. Russ and the Seahawks opened the season 5-0, only losing their first game to the Arizona Cardinals after a bye in Week 7. A game that also went to overtime. Throughout the season, they defeated the likes of New England, the Cowboys, the Niners, and the Rams, which becomes pretty important when analyzing their playoff performance. If you would have asked almost anyone, Seattle was just as in play for the Super Bowl as any team was this year. And that is squarely based on the regular season performance and what Russ was doing over the course of this year. Although, you've heard what I said about playoff pressure by now and how that affects everybody, and specifically for the Seahawks, how that affected Russell Wilson in these matchups. Although you know what I say about pressure by now, and when the Seahawks were matched up against the Rams in their wild card playoff bout, everyone was about to really find out what this team was made of. With a slightly more focused approach on the run game this season, spearheaded by running back Chris Carson, Russ' numbers dwindled down, especially in this matchup, to an abysmal 11 for 27, 174 yard throwing on the day. On a, albeit okay, 2 touchdown to 1 interception split. The quarterback was sacked 5 times and rushed for 50 yards, with an impressive, albeit impressive 4 rushes. Carson carried the rock for 77 yards on 16 carries, but even so, Goff's measly 155 yard and 0 interception performance, combined with the great coaching mind of Sean McVay, was enough to power the squad past the seemingly dominant Seattle roster in their 30-20 defeat. There is a common saying regarding the situation along the lines of, if you lose, lose to the champion, or something like that. However, it wouldn't be until the following year that the Rams would win in the Super Bowl, with Matthew Stafford. And instead, they would go on to lose against my Packers before we, of course, lost to the 49ers again. Oh, this is turning into just a Packers sad video. Of course, that's just our, playoff history, but whatever. At least this year it went okay, right? We didn't lose okay. Anyways, regardless, even after an amazingly impressive season like this one, Russ has no individual awards or team accomplishments to flaunt. Another season, another disappointment, which is growing into what could appear like another big picture failure for Seattle. We won't spend too much time on the 2021 season, which ultimately ended up being Russ's last season with the Seahawks. And now you might be asking, why is that? Why so? Well, there isn't much to say, honestly. The team went on to go 7-10 in the 14 games played by Russ during the year. He personally went 6-8 when starting, throwing for 3,113 yards on a 25-6 touchdown to interception split. And he had a 103.1 rating. I mean, it's pretty par for the course on how Russ was playing, given that he missed 2 or 3 games or whatever. I don't know if the 17-game rule was implemented yet. But the only difference is those numbers weren't resulting in wins this time around. And that mixed with more and more disgruntled teammates, coaches, and media members when it came to how Russ carried himself off the field, it just led to the Seahawks cutting their losses and trading the once great and Super Bowl winning quarterback to Denver, and instead just opting to start and play backup quarterback and journeyman Geno Smith. And a lot of this seemingly stemmed from Russ not agreeing with the direction of the offense, funnily enough. But, to be honest, Seattle was putting their defense in a hard position. With a high emphasis on drafting playmakers and skill positions in early rounds, their O-line grew very weak, and their defense grew even weaker. Something that Russ talked about even, saying, quote, "I'm frustrated at getting hit too much." He added, "I think that the reality is I've been hit, been sacked, 400 times. This kind of gave the public the first peer inside the turmoil both camps were experiencing, during this time. And then in October of 2021, in the midst of the season, Russ would break his middle finger on his throwing hand. This spawned in retrospect, a hilarious video of Russ practicing a 2-minute drive in an empty stadium. Something that definitely made the public believe Russ just did way too much stuff for the cameras. Even though he rushed himself back onto the field just 4 weeks later, the Seahawks could never recover. And in March 2022, both camps decided to part ways after writing being on the wall. And I think, if I recall correctly, I didn't include this, but I think Russ asked for he said, "If you trade me, these are the destinations I want to go to." So it was kind of both camps mutually deciding on this. And they moved the once highly touted franchise quarterback to the Broncos and their new ownership team for 2 first-round picks, 3 other draft selections, and quarterback Drew Lock, defensive tackle Shelby Harrison, and tight end Noah Fant. That's just a earth-shattering package for a player in his latter half of his career. And of course, you know, in retrospect, this has hindered the Broncos greatly in recent times. It's crazy in retrospect how short the Seattle run really was after going through it in such detail. And, you know, even in the beginning of this video, I'm talking about, and of course I wrote the script out, but I'm talking about how this team was a dynasty. And then I kind of resort to mini dynasty, and then I just stopped saying it altogether. I mean, it really feels like they were poised to make a decade-long run, but their run was relatively short, and their run as a Russ-led team was even shorter than that. On one hand, you know, the stats speak for themselves, and Russ truthers have a fair point in claiming the repositioning of the team into an offense-leaning one. That's one thing, but neglecting one side of the ball is a complete other. This 3 to 5 year run with Russ like kind of at the helm, of course it was really only like officially a 3-year run after the Legion of Boom left, but they had kind of segued a little, inched closer and closer over the span of like 5 years. And with Russ at the helm and the focus of the game plan week in and week out, that resulted in a team that just scraped by in the playoffs, which hurts especially so seeing how dominant they looked during the regular season. Whether you believe Russ in the offense or the Legion of Boom in that defense had a bigger hand in their winning ways, one thing is definitely for certain. You know, this team had so much potential to do more. It goes on to show how fickle and unforgiving America's greatest game really is. And that's why you say, like, you see these talk shows and these different guys saying, even, you know, Dan Campbell in their presser, he's saying, like, there's a good chance. And you see it so often that this team is poised to make multiple runs or whatever, and they just never make it back again. I mean, as a Packers fan, I understand that more than most. So, but regardless, you know, value what you have today because, you know, as they say, not to get too deep with it, but tomorrow is really never promised. And especially next season is never really promised in the NFL either. And, you know, that puts a bow on Russ's last years with Seattle. And for the sake of keeping this video and debate condensed, we won't really be taking his Denver years into account. Although you or anyone else could easily argue that I should. I think this conversation was sparked by his performance in Denver, and I think his time there was littered by a myriad of idiotic team-building factors and incompetent coaching that first year. Although this conversation is distinctly surrounding Russell Wilson's respective worth compared to the Legion of Booms when it comes to the Seattle dynastic run that they had. So let us take a step back and kind of refocus the discussion real quick. Alright, so I'm an hour and 20 minutes into this video now. My throat hurts. It's been forever since I sat down and recorded a video. And I'm realizing this is going to be hell to edit too, but I didn't really script out anything for this kind of conversation, the list part, because I kind of like, you know, this is like the finale to Sopranos. That's what, I mean, that's not what all my videos are, because obviously that's my favorite TV show ever, and that's my favorite finale ever. But what I mean by that is that I like to keep my videos open to interpretation. You know, a lot of times it's kind of like this guy versus this guy, or this team versus that team, or whatever. I'm comparing something, I'm trying to start a dialogue around it. So a hugely important part of that is that dialogue. But I also feel like I want to start kind of putting my voice into stuff too, so I get away from being, you know, so timeliney, it feels like sometimes. You know, just speaking from the heart, not to be corny, but looking at this, I think Russell Wilson, you know, I think there's truth in both sides, even though that's kind of the cheating answer. I think Russell Wilson gets way too much hate. And I think how the Broncos did him this year was sad to see. I mean, I could say more about it, but was it wrong? now that the emotional side of it is kind of past, maybe not. I mean, I do believe that Sean Payton is making hard decisions for what he thinks at least is the betterment of his team. And of course, you know, as time passes, we'll see how good the decision was. But at the same time, I mean, especially going through the video, there's no other way to cut it. The team was as good as they were. They were at their peaks when the Legion of Boom was at their prime. So you can't really make the argument that Russell Wilson played more of a hand, or had, even if we went back and said the offense, you can't really say the offense played more of a hand in that dynastic run than the defense did, simply. Yeah, so to recap, there's correctness on both sides, but I do think that a lot of people are right when they're saying it's the Legion of Boom. It's a cut to it. But if you think it's Russell Wilson, you know, you can make the case for that. I've clearly stated that multiple times throughout the video. But just for me, at the end of this all, kind of just bringing y'all inside, especially, like, I thought it was going to be more contentious when I started this video, and I think it will still be good to post because I think a lot of people might think it's contentious still too, or a lot of people might be like, okay, like, I know it's the defense and I kind of want to confirm what I think. Regardless, if you did make it to this point in the video, I appreciate you. Hopefully I gave you an insight to something you kind of haven't seen in a while, or haven't really thought of in a while. That's what I love to do here. And it took me a while to start recording videos again. I just graduated. There's so much details I could go to. I recorded a whole video before this where I like went into everything. I don't know if it'll ever see the light of day, but I just graduated college. I have a lot going on right now, but I definitely want to start uploading videos again. 100%. I never thought about giving it up. It just took me a long time to get back into the swing of things. This video was obviously so long. It took me so long to write, but I want to come back with something strong, something lengthy. And then hopefully we can just get into a good flow of things. Hopefully going back to uploading every week. But, you know, we'll see how life works out. Anyways, you can check out my channel. It's gone through a little bit of a rebrand. Jesus. Not cutting, because we're being real. We're just talking to one another. But we got a little bit of a rebrand. Still Underdog. Decided to keep that. I love making videos on sports, but I love making them on video games and music and culture, pop culture, and movies and whatever. I'm yapping now, as younger people would say, and I need to wrap this up. I don't know what my outro will be anymore, but we're still Underdog. We're still, check out. Got Steph back here. Hold up. Steph and Kobe. MJ and Kobe. That's the school I went to. We got Vertigo, great movie. I got these all at Universal. You can't see my albums up there, but one day you'll get to see it. But this video, first of all, I'm gonna skip to it. Thank you if you made it this far. I appreciate you. And I hope to see you again in the next video. But this video has been made by Underdog, and we're back. We're back, baby. Peace.